This part from the transition from the end of Soviet era, with Khrushchev, Gorbachev, and Yeltsin. How was that reflected in Russia and the end of Soviet Union, then Russia? How can you describe this transition period?
Well, I would say, Gorbachev and Yeltsin are universally hated. I'm not sure which one is hated more, which is why they're probably really revered in, I would say, the official West. I'm not sure if the general public in the West either cares or knows. But yeah, definitely, I would say most of the population, more than 90%, maybe 5 to 10% of sort of West-facing liberals, so to speak, do appreciate Yeltsin and Gorbachev, but Gorbachev is seen as a traitor, and Yeltsin is seen as this alcoholic that was kind of a mattress for Western capitalists. And I'm sort of exaggerating right now. Well, the neoliberalists that came in and basically looted the country, whether it was Russia's own oligarchs that took over, or whether it was Western powers, and not just Western, foreign powers that came over and basically started controlling Russia's rich natural resources. And it's kind of a story as old as time. We can always reduce geopolitics to a fight over resources in a certain land. And in terms of Russia, we can go back to 1918 when the Civil War was raging. It was not quite clear whether the Bolsheviks or the White Army were going to win, and that's when that so-called, Western allied intervention plus, Japan came to Russia, and basically under the guise of helping the whites, they were sort of trying to take over some very important features of Russia's natural resources in the Far East, for example. And they did have concessions in the 1920s. So when Lenin was in power, he was sort of more practical than Marxist ideology. He realized he needed to raise some money. So he did give concessions to these Western natural resource companies, for instance. So yeah, the interest in Russian resources, because Russia is such a huge country and it controls, a large chunk of Eurasia, obviously is sort of it's a long-term situation. So what happened in the 90s, we can sort of look at what happened in the the teens of the 20th century too. So, but yes, generally Yeltsin and Gorbachev are absolutely hated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned these three guys because I think they are the most famous. There has been other presidents during this time. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know much about it. That's a good. I haven't wrote this here. We don't know much
I would say Khrushchev is a little bit different because obviously he was sort of in the middle of the Soviet period. He came after Stalin, but I think the public opinion about him is a little bit more, maybe not split, it's maybe more nuanced. But I would say that sort of certain policies of de-Stalinization that sort of went too far, in some people's view. Obviously, these sort of emotional responses during, something like the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. People, I personally am not a fan. Specific to the Ukrainian situation, he wasn't ethnically Ukrainian, but he did have a Western Ukrainian wife. And he sort of was raised in what today is Donbass, right? Sort of former Eastern Ukraine, but historical Russian lands. And so he had a strong connection to that area. So obviously he sort of gave away Crimea to what was then the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic for administrative reasons, but also there are rumors that it was a gift to his wife, which is really, pretty, that says a lot about him as a person. But also, he, a lot of these Banderites, right, Ukrainian nationalists that were very harmful, they collaborated with Nazi Germany. Some of them fought independently, but he rehabilitated a lot of them and sort of let them out of prisons, and they sort of were incorporated back into the system. Nothing changed about their ideology. So it was kind of a ticking time bomb of what we saw in the 90s after the Soviet collapse, and especially going into the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, then the Maidan, and of course the last 9 years with the war in Donbass that sort of escalated last year. So yeah, in my opinion, Khrushchev was, I could see how he couldn't foresee certain things, but at the same time, he seemed to be very very sure and very optimistic about doing nothing about people who needed to be ideologically re-educated, so to speak, or perhaps kept in prisons had they committed serious crimes. So there's sort of all these things, specifically, I would say Russians in terms of Crimea, that's probably the thing that comes to mind first, more so than the Cuban Missile Crisis as far as Khrushchev goes. And obviously the opinion there would be very, very harsh. So.